Tons of Blake's causes have been dismissed. We got Ron here to break it down.
Justin Baldoni just won big. And when I say big, I mean the kind of courtroom win that completely reshapes a legal battle that has been dominating entertainment news for months. Judge Lyman dropped his summary judgment, ruling 152 pages. And when the dust settled, the picture looked dramatically different from what Blake Lively's team had been building toward. Let me break down exactly what happened, because the specifics matter here. Blake Lively had filed a sprawling lawsuit that included sexual harassment claims, hostile work environment claims, retaliation claims, defamation, false light, civil conspiracy, and more. It was an expansive legal attack across multiple fronts, targeting Justin Baldoni personally and professionally.
She lost sexual harassment. She lost hostile work environment. All sexual harassment claims, Title 7, FEHA, California Code, all retaliation under Title 7, California Code. The defamation claims, a judge ruled Freeman's inflammatory statements were protected under fair report privilege because they were made in connection with legal proceedings, duh.
After 152 pages, Judge Lyman dismissed almost all of it. Sexual harassment dismissed. Hostile work environment dismissed. All sexual harassment claims under Title 7 and California Code dismissed. Retaliation under Title 7 dismissed. Defamation claims dismissed, with the judge ruling that the statements were protected under fair report privilege because they were made in connection with legal proceedings. False light claims dismissed. Civil conspiracy dismissed. The actors' loan agreement was ruled unenforceable because it was never fully executed. What survived? 3 claims. Retaliation under FEHA, California's Fair Employment and Housing Act against Wayfarer Studios. Aiding and abetting retaliation under FEHA against TAG, the PR firm. And breach of the contract writer agreement against the It Ends With Us movie LLC. Here is the critical detail that changes everything. Justin Baldoni's name does not appear on any of the surviving claims. Not one.
I don't see Baldoni's name in what survived in this summary. You just told me about this a few minutes ago, and it's 152 pages. I'm gonna read most of it, and I'm happy to come back on to be more substantive. But I don't see Baldoni's name on anything.
The remaining defendants are Wayfarer Studios, TAG, and the It Ends With Us movie LLC. Baldoni himself has been dropped from everything. This is not a partial win. This is a comprehensive dismissal of the case against Baldoni personally. The battle that has consumed the entertainment world, Blake versus Justin, has, in its most personal dimension, been resolved. Justin won. Now, let us talk about what this means in practical terms, because the legal landscape here is more interesting than the headline suggests. Baldoni still has his countersuit in play. He was pursuing claims against Stephanie Jones and others, and the ruling that Blake's primary claims against him lacked sufficient evidence to survive summary judgment actually strengthens his countersuit position. If she never had a real case against him in the first place, and the judge's ruling strongly implies she did not.
Pretty wild as we're going through it and we're getting to it, as Lyman puts here, the motions are granted in part, denied part, particularly the motions are granted except fourth cause of action for retaliation in violation of California law.
Given how definitively the claims were dismissed, then the argument that pursuing those claims was malicious and frivolous becomes considerably more viable. The standard at summary judgment is also worth understanding, because it is important context for grasping how significant this ruling is. At this stage, the judge is supposed to view the evidence in the light most favorable to the non-moving party. That means the judge is supposed to give Blake every reasonable benefit of the doubt. Even under that generous standard, where the burden on her was, in legal terms, relatively easy, she still lost the vast majority of her claims. She could not produce enough evidence to generate a genuine factual dispute that would justify sending the issues to a jury. That is a significant indictment of the case's evidentiary foundation. When you cannot clear the lowest bar, when even with the court's thumb on your side of the scale, you still cannot show there is a real question of fact, it suggests the claims were not adequately supported by what actually happened. Now, the 3 surviving claims deserve their own examination, because they are not nothing, but they are considerably less than what Blake Lively's team entered this fight hoping to achieve. The FEHA retaliation claim against Wayfarer Studios is about whether the company took adverse action against Lively in response to her complaints about the working environment. This is a narrower and more specific claim than the broader harassment allegations that were dismissed. The aiding and abetting claim against TAG, the PR firm, is where things get genuinely interesting, because TAG's conduct has been one of the most documented and most troubling elements of this entire saga. The text messages. The phrases like, "We can bury him, but I can't write that." The reference to executing plans without fingerprints. The social combat strategy activated the day after the premiere. The judge found that this evidence was credible enough to go to a jury. But here is the problem for Blake Lively, even on these surviving claims: damages. What did she actually lose that is directly attributable to TAG's conduct and separable from all the other noise around this case? What business opportunities did she miss? What films did she not make?
So there's a lot of, because of so much has happened, right? Like this is, what docket is this? 1,273. That's how many things have been filed. That doesn't include the things that have been exchanged that were not filed. But this ruling helps Justin in so many ways, both on the offense and on the defense later.
What quantifiable harm can she connect specifically to TAG's actions as opposed to everything else that has happened in this lawsuit? This is the question that will haunt her remaining claims. A jury might accept that TAG engaged in questionable conduct, but a jury also has to award damages, and damages require a direct and credible connection between the harm and the conduct. In a case this complex and this publicly contested, establishing that specific causal chain is going to be genuinely difficult. The breach of contract claim against the It Ends With Us movie LLC is the most straightforward of the three, but also the one where the commercial stakes are most clearly defined. If the contract was breached, what was owed under it, and what is the monetary value of that breach?
Yes, and the problem for Lively is, what are her damages that really stem from it, that aren't speculative at trial, right? Because the jury's going to see, like, okay, let's assume you, Lively, have presented evidence that a smear campaign actually happened, and however, the elements are met. Well, what did you lose?
This is more tractable territory for a jury, but also potentially the least dramatically significant given the size of what Lively originally sought. The broader strategic picture for both sides has now shifted dramatically, and understanding that shift requires looking at where the leverage sits. Before this ruling, Baldoni's team was managing defense on multiple fronts. The harassment claims, the defamation claims, the civil conspiracy allegations, all of these required resources, preparation, and exposure. The legal fees alone on a case of this complexity, with this many active claims, are significant. And each active claim represented a potential liability at trial, a potential headline, a potential moment where a jury might find something, even if only narrowly.
Whoever was holding out, if Lively was holding out in that mediation and she didn't want to settle, she probably wishes she did now.
After this ruling, that exposure has been reduced to near zero for Baldoni personally. He is no longer a defendant. He gets to watch the remaining defendants navigate the surviving claims while he positions his countersuit. The leverage has inverted completely. For Blake Lively, the calculus is now uncomfortable. She went into this fight with an expansive legal theory and a very public campaign. The timing of the complaint, the Variety interview, the documentary evidence of a PR battle, all of it packaged as a Me Too moment that deserved public support. She generated significant initial public sympathy. The ruling has not destroyed that narrative entirely.
Right.
So that's obviously now going to be a big battle. Obviously affects even my subpoena and all the things they were accusing, which I know they weren't working in cahoots with me in any ways like that. Based on just the signal chats being deleted on auto delete.
The TAG conduct the text messages, the social combat plan, the working to destroy without fingerprints is still in the case and is still troubling on its face. But the sexual harassment claim that gave the entire story its moral weight, gone. The hostile work environment that made the PR battle feel like corporate retaliation, gone. What remains is a narrower argument about a PR firm's conduct and whether that conduct caused specific, quantifiable harm. This is a much harder story to tell to a jury, and it is a much harder case to win. The May trial date is still on the calendar, But anyone advising Blake Lively right now is having a very specific conversation. This is not the case you want to take to trial in its current shape. The surviving claims are limited. The damages are speculative.
Whether it led to any damages or harm to Lively. So it's really kind of supposed to be a very easy burden for her, as long as she has something to like show. What I would love, I'm more interested to see is like, on the harassment claims and hostile work environment that were kicked out, the judge is going to be like,
the opposing side has just been handed a massive win and has the resources and the motivation to make the trial as damaging as possible. And if you lose at trial, which is now a genuine possibility, you lose publicly, on the record, after having made a very public case for your narrative. Settling is not the same as losing. Settling, with the right terms, is what a rational actor does when the litigation risk has shifted this dramatically. The question is whether Baldoni wants to settle, and after a ruling this favorable, he has every reason to make the price of settlement higher than it was before this judgment dropped. Now, the Cher interview and its role in this story is worth addressing directly, because it sits at the intersection of the legal claims and the public narrative in a way that is directly relevant to where things go from here. The tag text messages reference a social combat plan executed without fingerprints. The question of how certain viral moments, including the Cher interview, came to public attention, and whether that was organic or orchestrated.
Am I crazy? I thought there was something about the smear campaign doesn't even really work if there's not a sexual harassment claim to go with it. No? Didn't those go in tandem in some way, like as an employer?
Is one that the remaining tag claim will force into the open. Tag's lawyers will argue their client's conduct was not the proximate cause of any harm. Lively's team will argue it was. And the documentary evidence of what Tag was planning and doing will be in front of a jury. But here is the thing. The jury will also hear about everything Lively's side did. The way the complaint was timed and packaged, the variety interview, the public campaign, the evidence of what her team was doing to manage the narrative simultaneously with what Tag was doing. None of that is privileged or protected, and if the trial happens, it all comes out. This is the double-edged sword of going to trial with the remaining claims. You get to present your evidence of Tag's conduct, but you also expose everything your own side did to every juror in the room.
What is Tag responsible for as far as her harm? And that's her burden. And I'm sure like Baldoni's attorneys, now it's really, Tag's attorneys will be like, I don't know what it is either, but she's gonna have to figure it out.
And that scrutiny, in a case this publicly contested and this thoroughly documented, is not a comfortable place to be. The Baldoni team is well aware of this. Their countersuit against Stephanie Jones is still active, and the evidence they want to present about what happened on the other side of this conflict, how the original narrative was constructed and deployed, is exactly the kind of evidence that becomes more powerful at trial, not less. Justin Baldoni, who has not been a defendant since this ruling dropped, now sits in an unusual position. He watches the remaining claims proceed against entities he is associated with, but from which he has been personally separated by the court. He prosecutes his countersuit with the legitimacy that comes from having had the primary claims against him dismissed, and he decides, at a pace and on terms that serve his interests, whether and how to engage with any settlement conversation. The leverage is his.
Like this is a huge blow for her already, and this is a hot take, but I think as we get into it, it's gonna be worse when we really get into the details. And then if she loses a trial, which she has a chance really now to lose a trial, because she's gonna.
That is the fundamental reality of where this case stands after 152 pages of judicial analysis. For the entertainment industry more broadly, this ruling carries implications that go beyond the specific parties. The way this lawsuit was filed and publicized, the timing, the packaging, the public campaign that accompanied the legal complaint generated enormous coverage and enormous public response before any court had evaluated the underlying claims. The summary judgment ruling, which dismissed the vast majority of those claims, is a reminder that legal complaints and legal merits are not the same thing. A complaint can be comprehensive and compelling as a document and still fail to survive the evidentiary scrutiny of a court process. This does not mean nothing happened on set. It does not mean the working environment was comfortable or that Tag's conduct was appropriate. The surviving claims suggest there are genuine factual disputes about at least some of what occurred. But the specific claims that generated the most public outrage, the sexual harassment,
and they'll have more time to do it now to prove all the things Blake Lively did wrong, right? And all that stuff's going to come back to her face again of the Shersty interview and all these things that they're going to claim. How did Tag get the Shersty video to come out? There's no way they did, and that's where a lot of the momentum really came from.
The hostile work environment did not have the evidentiary support that the public presentation implied they did. That is a significant finding, and it will shape how this case and cases like it are understood going forward. The hearing that followed the ruling's release will tell us about tone, about whether Lively's team is signaling a desire for more time, for a settlement conference, for a private mediator, about whether the trial date in May holds, or whether the newly clarified landscape produces a different kind of conversation, about whether the attorneys who came into court expecting to try one case are now adjusting to trying a much smaller and more focused one. Whatever happens next, the story has changed. Justin Baldoni is no longer a defendant. Blake Lively has 3 surviving claims of limited scope and uncertain damages.
It's not a good argument for her. Like, I would try to settle this immediately. Start making the calls.
Do you think this goes to trial in May?
It depends on Baldoni. Baldoni has all the leverage now. It really depends on.
Tag's conduct is going to a jury, where the story of what everyone did is going to be told in full. The question now is not whether Justin won this round. He did, comprehensively. The question is what Blake Lively does with the hand she has left, and whether anyone in her orbit is giving her the honest assessment that taking a case this weekend to trial in May is not the outcome she should be aiming. 4. The ruling is 152 pages. The implications will take longer than that to fully play out. But the headline is clear: Justin Baldoni just won big. And the case that was supposed to be about his conduct has become, in its surviving form, primarily a case about everyone else's. Let us go deeper on the Tag situation specifically, because it is the most legally active remaining element and the one with the most potential to produce dramatic courtroom moments. Tag, the agency group, the PR firm whose text messages became some of the most widely circulated documents in this entire saga, was retained to manage the public narrative around Baldoni and the film. The messages that emerged from their internal communications were striking on their face. Explicit discussions of a social combat plan, references to making things untraceable, the specific phrase about being able to destroy someone without putting it in writing. These are not the messages of a PR firm operating in the ordinary course of reputation management. They are the messages of people who understood they were engaged in something aggressive and wanted deniability for it. The judge found this evidence credible enough to survive to trial. That means a jury will get to read those messages. A jury will get to hear about the social combat plan and what it involved. And Lively's team will have the opportunity to argue that Tag's conduct caused specific, quantifiable harm to her career and her reputation, but Tag's defense is not without resources. Their lawyers will argue that whatever the tone of those internal communications, the conduct that actually occurred was within the bounds of legitimate PR activity. They will argue that Lively's own side was engaged in a parallel campaign, that her team was also actively managing the narrative, also working to shape public perception, also deploying strategies that were not passive responses to coverage, but active efforts to influence it. This is the double-sided nature of the PR battle evidence. Both sides were doing things. The question is, whose doing of things crossed a legal line and caused attributable harm? And in a world where aggressive PR is the norm in Hollywood disputes, convincing a jury that Tag specifically crossed a line that other firms routinely approach is a substantive challenge. The damages question is, as noted, the central vulnerability in Lively's surviving claims. What did she lose? The entertainment industry question is concrete. What films was she not hired for? What deals did not materialize? What career opportunities evaporated because of Tag's conduct specifically, as opposed to the general fallout from a lawsuit this publicly prominent and this widely covered? The honest answer is that establishing this causal chain is very difficult. Entertainment careers are complex and multifactored. The reasons a particular project comes together or falls apart are rarely reducible to a single identifiable cause. And in a case where the plaintiff herself was a very active participant in the public narrative, where her own team's communications will be part of the evidentiary record, arguing that it was specifically Tag's conduct that caused specific harm, becomes genuinely difficult to separate from the noise. This is why the strategic advice to settle is not defeatist. It is rational. The upside of going to trial is limited. If she wins, she recovers damages on claims that the judge has already significantly constrained. The downside is substantial. If she loses, the narrative that she brought a case without sufficient evidentiary support is confirmed publicly, in a courtroom, on the record. Settlement, if it can be achieved on terms she can live with, is the rational outcome for a case in this shape. The question is whether Baldoni, who now has all the leverage, agrees to terms that allow that to happen. His calculation is different. He has been personally vindicated by the ruling. His countersuit against Stephanie Jones is active and potentially more viable in the current landscape. The remaining litigation, which does not involve him directly as a defendant, continues to produce evidence and testimony that may be useful to his affirmative claims. And taking this to trial means the full story of what happened on both sides gets told publicly, under oath, with all the documentary evidence that has been accumulated across 1,273 docket entries. That full story may be one that serves his interests more than hers, which is, perhaps, the most important reason why the advice to settle is being offered from her side and the leverage to demand terms sits on his. The May trial date remains. The hearing will clarify the immediate procedural landscape, but the strategic terrain has shifted so dramatically in a single ruling that both sides are now operating in a fundamentally different environment than the one they entered this week expecting, a 152 pages. Most of it dismissed. Justin Baldoni, no longer a defendant. 3 surviving claims, limited in scope, uncertain in damages, against entities, rather than the man whose name defined this battle. That is where the Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni story stands. And the next chapter will tell us whether Blake Lively's team can read the landscape clearly enough to make the rational move, or whether pride and narrative investment will carry a weakened case into a courtroom in May. Answer to that question will say something important about how Hollywood processes these kinds of disputes, about whether the public campaign that accompanies a legal complaint is a strategy that serves the underlying case, or whether it sometimes forecloses the kind of quiet, rational resolution that would serve everyone better. For now, the ruling is clear, the leverage is clear, and Justin Baldoni, who is no longer a defendant, is watching the case that was supposed to define his liability instead define the limits of what the opposing side could actually prove. That is a significant place to be. And 152 pages got him there. There is a broader entertainment industry dimension to this ruling that is worth examining, because the Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni case was never just about 2 people from one film. It became a cultural flashpoint about how abuse allegations are made, how they are communicated to the public, and what happens when the legal process produces findings that complicate the initial narrative. When Lively filed her complaint, the timing and packaging were not accidental. The Variety interview, the documentation of the alleged PR campaign, the way the story was released into a media environment that had been primed by years of Me Too discourse to receive allegations of this kind with a specific kind of sympathy. The complaint was not simply a legal document, it was a communication strategy. This is not inherently wrong. Public figures have the right to tell their stories. Allegations of workplace misconduct are matters of legitimate public interest, and the evidence of Tag's conduct, the untraceable social combat plan, The text messages about destroying without fingerprints was and remains genuinely troubling as a picture of how PR firms operate in high-stakes Hollywood disputes. But the packaging of the complaint created public expectations about what the underlying legal case would prove. The sexual harassment framing, the hostile work environment framing. These are serious and specific legal categories with specific evidentiary requirements. And the judge's ruling that the evidence, even viewed in the light most favorable to Lively, was insufficient to survive. To trial on these claims means the packaging created expectations the legal case could not fulfill. This creates a specific problem for the way abuse allegations are handled more broadly. When a high-profile case that was presented as a clear and serious workplace abuse situation is dismissed on most of its central claims, it generates exactly the kind of skepticism that makes it harder for future complainants, including those with better supported cases, to be heard with open minds. This is not Lively's fault entirely, and it is not something that should discourage anyone with genuine claims from pursuing them. But it is a real consequence of a strategy that prioritized public impact over evidentiary precision, and it is something the industry will be processing for some time. The Baldoni team, for its part, argued from the beginning that what they were dealing with was not a Me Too case, but a counter-narrative campaign, that the allegations were constructed and deployed to gain leverage in a dispute that had its origins in creative and professional disagreements rather than genuine sexual misconduct. The summary judgment ruling does not prove this argument completely. It does not tell us that nothing uncomfortable happened on that set. But it does tell us that whatever happened could not be packaged into viable legal claims of sexual harassment and hostile work environment with the evidence available. Whether that is because nothing legally actionable occurred, or because the evidence of what did occur was insufficient, or because the claims were pursued on a theory that the facts did not support, these are questions the ruling does not fully answer. What it answers is the narrow legal question: does the evidence, at this stage, support sending these specific claims to a jury? On most of them, the answer is no. The entertainment industry trial in May, if it happens, will be about the surviving claims, which are narrower and more focused. It will not be the broad reckoning that the original complaint seemed to promise. It will be about what Tag specifically did, whether that constitutes a violation of specific legal standards, and what specific harm it caused. That is a more tractable and less dramatic case, and it may produce a more tractable and less dramatic outcome. For Justin Baldoni, the ruling is not just a legal win, it is a restoration. He entered this fight having been publicly identified as the subject of serious sexual harassment allegations, with all the professional and personal consequences that come with that identification. He now exits the case as a defendant on a judicial finding that the evidence was insufficient to take those allegations to trial. That is not a finding of innocence in any absolute sense, but it is a significant judicial statement about the quality of the evidence supporting the allegations, and it matters enormously to his professional future. His films will be made. His career will continue. The It Ends With Us dispute will continue to be processed through legal channels, but without the personal liability that the original complaint sought to impose. The man who was supposed to be defined by this case has, through 152 pages of judicial analysis, been separated from its most damaging claims. Blake Lively's situation is more complicated. She retains 3 claims. She can go to trial in May if she chooses. She may even win on one or more of those claims. But the narrative she built, the public story she told about what happened, the expectations she created about what the legal process would reveal has been significantly undercut by a ruling that found most of that story did not have the evidentiary support to survive the court's scrutiny. How she handles this next phase will say something about her. Whether she takes the rational path and negotiates a settlement from a weakened but not non-existent position, whether she doubles down on the public narrative and goes to trial with the hope that the Tag evidence is compelling enough to produce a verdict, whether she finds some middle path that allows the dispute to resolve without the full exposure that trial would bring. The attorneys will be advising. The hearing will produce signals. and the 1,273 docket entries in a case that has generated this much attention will continue to accumulate as the parties figure out what comes next. But the headline is already written. The ruling is 152 pages, most of it dismissed. Justin Baldoni is no longer a defendant. And the case that was supposed to be his undoing has become, in its surviving form, something considerably smaller and considerably more uncertain, 152 pages. One big win. And a trial in May that both sides now have very different reasons to either pursue or avoid. That is where the story stands. And the next move belongs to Blake.